The town of Frost Hollow rested in a valley where winter lasted 8 months of the year. Snow covered the rooftops like a thick wool blanket, and smoke rose from chimneys in steady streams. But the true heart of the town was Mirror Lake, a vast expanse of water that froze solid every November and only thawed in late April. For generations, the people of Frost Hollow built their lives around that lake. They fished in it, they skated on it, and every winter, they held the ice fishing derby, a tradition that brought in tourists from 3 states away. It was the one weekend of the year when the town's motels filled up, the diner stayed open past midnight, and children ran across the ice with hot chocolate staining their gloves. No one imagined that this year's derby would unearth something the town had tried very hard to forget. On the second morning of the competition, a man named Walter Pike drilled his auger into the ice near the northern shore. He was a quiet man who kept to himself, a retired mechanic who came to the lake every morning at 6. That day, his auger bit through 18 inches of ice and struck something soft. He pulled it back up and saw fabric clinging to the blades. Brown wool. He drilled again, a few feet to the left, and this time, when he peered into the dark water below, he saw a hand floating upward, pale as the snow around him. Walter did not scream. He simply stood there, his breath fogging the air, and then he walked back to his truck and drove straight to the sheriff's office without saying a word to anyone. By 7 in the morning, the lake was cordoned off with yellow tape, and the tourists were asked to return to their cabins. The derby was over. What came next was just beginning. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Sheriff Warren Mills stood at the edge of the lake with his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. He was 43 years old, a local boy who had moved away for college, spent 12 years as a detective in the capital, and then returned home when his mother got sick. He had thought Frost Hollow would be quiet. He had thought the biggest crime he would handle was teenagers stealing beer from the general store. Now he watched as the dive team pulled a body from the water, a dark shape against the white ice. The corpse was remarkably preserved. The cold had kept it intact, the skin waxy and pale, the eyes closed, the mouth slightly open as if caught in mid-sentence. The man wore a brown wool coat and heavy boots. Around his neck, a silver fishing lure hung from a leather cord. Sheriff Mills did not need to see the face to know who it was. He had grown up hearing the stories. Samuel Cross disappeared 15 years ago, 2 days before Christmas. The town had searched for weeks. They dragged the lake, they combed the woods, they put up posters in every town within 100 miles. But no body was ever found. Samuel Cross became a legend, a cautionary tale whispered in bars and kitchens. He drank too much, people said. He fell through the ice. He walked into the woods and never came out. But here he was, 15 years later, rising from the lake like a judgment. Sheriff Mills knelt down and looked at the body. That was when he saw it. A thin, clean line across the back of the skull. Not a crack from the ice. Not damage from the water. A cut. Made by something sharp. Made by someone who knew what they were doing. The news spread through Frost Hollow faster than the winter wind. By noon, every person in town knew that Samuel Cross had been found. They gathered in small groups outside the diner, in the parking lot of the hardware store, in the warm kitchen of the church basement. They spoke in hushed voices, their eyes darting toward the lake. Margaret Cross heard the news from her neighbor, who knocked on her door at 8 in the morning and would not leave until Margaret came outside. Margaret was 71 now, a thin woman with white hair and hands that shook slightly from years of holding on to grief. She had spent 15 years wondering. 15 years waking up every morning and looking out the window, hoping to see her husband walking up the driveway. 15 years of silence. Now she walked to the lake with her neighbor's arm around her waist, her boots crunching on the frozen snow. When she saw the body bag on the shore, she stopped walking. Sheriff Mills approached her, his face soft with sympathy. "Margaret, I'm so sorry." She did not look at him. She looked at the bag. "Is it him?" "Yes." "We're certain." She nodded slowly. Then she pointed at the bag. "Take me to him. I need to see." The sheriff hesitated, then led her forward. A deputy unzipped the bag just enough to reveal the face. Margaret stared for a long moment. The man in the bag was younger than she remembered, preserved by the cold, frozen in time. He still had the same strong jaw, the same dark hair, the same small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident. She reached out and touched his cheek. It was like touching ice. Then she looked at the back of his head. Even through the matted hair, she saw it. The cut. She straightened up and turned to the sheriff. "My husband did not fall in the lake. Someone put him there. And you are going to find out who." Leo Brennan arrived in Frost Hollow 3 days later, driving a rented sedan that struggled up the icy roads. He was 56 years old, a former police detective from the capital who had been fired after a case went wrong and then spent the next 8 years working as a private investigator, taking whatever cases came his way. Most of them were small. Cheating spouses, insurance fraud, missing pets. He had not worked a real homicide in years. But Margaret Cross had called him personally. She had found his name in an old newspaper article about a case he solved back when he still had a badge. She did not trust the local police. She did not trust anyone in Frost Hollow. Leo pulled into the town and immediately understood why. Frost Hollow was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Strangers were noticed. Strangers were watched. He checked into the only motel in town, a faded building with a flickering neon sign that read "The Iceman Inn." The woman at the front desk looked at him with open curiosity. "Here for the fishing?" she asked. "Here to see a client," Leo said. She nodded, but her eyes followed him all the way up the stairs. That afternoon, he met Margaret Cross in her small house on the edge of town. She served him coffee and told him everything. About Samuel, about the night he disappeared, about the years of silence. "The sheriff says it was an accident," she said. "He says Samuel fell through the ice and drowned. But Samuel knew that lake better than anyone. He grew up on it. He would never walk on thin ice." Leo listened carefully. "The cut on his head," he said. "The sheriff says it could have happened when the ice broke. A sharp edge." Margaret shook her head. "You don't believe that." "And neither do I." She leaned forward. "I want you to find out what happened to my husband. I want you to find out who killed him. And I want you to prove it. I don't care how long it takes or what it costs." Leo looked at the woman across the table. He saw the years of pain in her eyes, the years of not knowing. He had seen that look before, on the faces of too many families. He nodded slowly. "I'll do what I can." Leo started where any investigator would start. He read the old case files, which Sheriff Mills reluctantly provided. He interviewed the people who had known Samuel. He walked the streets of Frost Hollow, asking questions, taking notes, building a picture of a man who had disappeared 15 years before. What he found was a town that did not want to talk. People answered his questions with short sentences and averted eyes. They remembered Samuel, of course. Everyone remembered Samuel. But when Leo asked about the night he disappeared, the answers became vague. He was at the bar. He left alone. I didn't see anything. It was the same story, repeated over and over, like a script everyone had memorized. Leo knew that script. He had heard it before, in other cases, other towns. It meant one thing: fear. On his third day in Frost Hollow, Leo drove out to the old cannery on the south shore of the lake. The building had been abandoned for years, its windows broken, its walls covered in graffiti. But once, it had been the lifeblood of the town. Frost Hollow canned goods. Employed half the town. Brought money and jobs and stability. Samuel Cross had worked there, briefly, as a night watchman. Leo walked around the building, stepping over broken glass and frozen puddles. At the back, near the shore, he found something interesting. A pipe, hidden in the weeds, leading from the building directly into the lake. It was old, rusted, but clearly designed to carry something into the water. Leo knelt down and looked closer. The ground around the pipe was stained dark, even after all these years. He took out his phone and photographed it. Then he drove back to town and went straight to the library, where he spent the afternoon reading old newspapers from the year Samuel disappeared. It took him 3 hours, but he found it. A small article, buried on page 7. Environmental group raises concerns about cannery waste. The article mentioned that a local activist had filed a complaint about the cannery dumping chemicals into the lake. The activist's name was Samuel Cross. Leo sat in the library for a long time, staring at the microfilm screen. Samuel Cross had filed a complaint against the cannery. 3 months later, he disappeared. Now his body had been found in the lake, with a cut on his head that no one wanted to talk about. It was not proof. But it was a direction. The next morning, Leo drove to the cannery again, but this time he did not stop at the building. He drove past it, following a narrow road that led deeper into the woods. After about a mile, he found what he was looking for. A small cabin, half hidden among the pines. Smoke rose from the chimney. A truck was parked outside. Leo knocked on the door. A man opened it. He was old, maybe 70, with a gray beard and suspicious eyes. "What do you want?" "Are you Arthur Pines?" The man hesitated. "Who's asking?" "My name is Leo Brennan. I'm a private investigator. I'm looking into the death of Samuel Cross." Arthur Pines stared at him for a long moment. Then he stepped back and held the door open. "You better come in." The cabin was small but warm. Arthur made coffee and sat across from Leo at a wooden table. "I worked at the cannery for 30 years, he said. "I was there when Samuel started as night watchman. He was a good man. Quiet. Kept to himself. But he saw things." "What kind of things?" Arthur looked out the window, toward the lake. At night, when everyone was gone, trucks would come. They would back up to the loading dock and dump barrels into the water. Samuel saw them. He wrote it all down. Dates, times, license plates. He took it to the town council. He thought they would do something. Did they? Arthur laughed, a short, bitter sound. They told him to keep quiet. Said it would ruin the town if people found out. Said the cannery was the only thing keeping Frost Hollow alive. Samuel didn't listen. He went to the newspaper. He filed a complaint with the state. He thought the truth would set everything right. And then he disappeared. Arthur nodded slowly. 3 days before Christmas. He was supposed to meet me here, at this cabin. He wanted to show me something, he said. Something important. He never showed up. Leo returned to his motel room that night and spread everything out on the small desk. Photographs. Notes. Newspaper clippings. The timeline was clear. Samuel Cross discovered the illegal dumping. He reported it to the town council. He filed a complaint with the state. He was about to meet with a witness. Then he vanished. The official story was that he fell through the ice while drunk. But Samuel had not been a drinker. Everyone who knew him said the same thing. He had a beer now and then, but he was not the kind of man who stumbled home from bars. And his body had been found near the North Shore, not the South Shore where the dumping happened. Someone had moved him. Someone had made it look like an accident. The next morning, Leo went to see Sheriff Mills. He laid out what he had found. The dumping. The complaint. The meeting that never happened. Sheriff Mills listened with his arms crossed, his face unreadable. When Leo finished, the sheriff was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "That was 15 years ago, Brennan. The cannery is closed. The people involved are dead or gone. Even if something happened back then, what do you expect me to do about it now?" "I expect you to investigate," Leo said. "I expect you to look at that cut on Samuel's head and admit it wasn't an accident." Sheriff Mills stood up. "I've looked at it. It could have happened 100 different ways. Ice is sharp. Rocks are sharp. Falling into a frozen lake does a lot of damage to a body. Then why won't you let anyone else look at it? Why won't you send it to a medical examiner?" The sheriff's eyes hardened. "Because I don't need some outsider coming into my town and telling me how to do my job. Samuel Cross died 15 years ago. He's been in that lake for 15 years. Nothing is going to bring him back." Leo stood up slowly. "No. But the truth might give his wife some peace." Sheriff Mills walked to the door and opened it. "My office is close to you from now on, Brennan. If you have any evidence of a crime, you bring it to me. Otherwise, stay out of my way." Leo walked out into the cold and stood on the sidewalk, breathing in the frozen air. He knew now that he was on the right track. Because Sheriff Mills was afraid. That night, someone broke into Leo's motel room. He was at dinner when it happened, eating alone at the diner, going over his notes. When he returned, the door was slightly open. Inside, his papers were scattered across the floor. His laptop was gone. His camera was gone. The photographs of the pipe, the notes about Arthur Pines, everything related to the case had been taken. Leo stood in the doorway and looked at the mess. They had not taken his wallet or his phone. They had only taken the evidence. He walked to the front desk and told the woman what had happened. She called the sheriff, who arrived 20 minutes later, looking irritated. Sheriff Mills walked through the room, glanced at the mess, and shrugged. "Probably kids," he said. "We get break-ins sometimes. Kids looking for money or booze." Leo looked at him. They took my case files. They left my wallet on the nightstand. Maybe they didn't see it. They saw it. It was right there. Sheriff Mills met his gaze. I'll file a report. Not much else I can do. You should keep your door locked. He left. Leo sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the empty desk. He had not made copies. He had not backed up his files. Everything he had learned in the past 4 days was gone. But Arthur Pines was still there. The cabin in the woods. The old man who had agreed to talk. Leo stood up and walked out into the night. He drove to Arthur's cabin, his headlights cutting through the darkness. When he arrived, he knew something was wrong. The cabin was dark. No smoke from the chimney. The truck was gone. He knocked on the door. No answer. He tried the handle. It was unlocked. Inside, the cabin was empty. The furniture was still there, but the personal belongings were gone. Clothes, photographs, food. All of it, cleared out. Arthur Pines had vanished. Leo stood in the empty cabin and felt the cold seeping through his coat. Arthur was gone. The only witness willing to talk had disappeared the same night someone stole his evidence. This was not coincidence. This was a message. He drove back to town and went straight to Margaret Cross's house. She opened the door in her bathrobe, her face worried. Leo? What happened? He told her everything. The break-in. The stolen files. Arthur's disappearance. Margaret listened in silence, her hands gripping the edge of the kitchen table. When he finished, she said, "They're cleaning up." After all these years, they're still cleaning up. Who? She shook her head. I don't know their names. I never did. But Samuel knew. He told me once that the cannery was just the beginning. He said there were people in this town who would do anything to protect what they had. I thought he was being paranoid. She looked up at Leo. He wasn't, was he? Leo sat down across from her. No. He wasn't. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Margaret said, "What do we do now?" Leo thought about it. His evidence was gone. His witness was gone. The sheriff was working against him. Every person in this town either knew something or was too afraid to talk. He was an outsider with nothing but his instincts and a dead man's wife who refused to give up. We start over, he said. We go back to the beginning. There has to be something else. Someone else who knew. Margaret nodded slowly. There's one person. Samuel's sister. She moved away years ago, right after he disappeared. She lives in the city now. She never believed it was an accident. Do you have her contact information? Margaret stood up and walked to an old wooden cabinet in the corner. She pulled out a dusty photo album and flipped through the pages until she found a faded envelope tucked inside. Her name is Rebecca Cross. She was closer to Samuel than anyone. If anyone knows something, it's her. Leo called Rebecca Cross the next morning. She answered on the third ring, her voice wary. He explained who he was and why he was calling. There was a long silence on the other end. Then she said, "They found Samuel?" "Yes. 3 weeks ago." Another silence. "I saw it on the news. I didn't know what to do. I haven't been back to that town in 15 years. Why not? Rebecca's voice hardened. Because I know what happened there. I know what they did to my brother. And I know that if I went back, I wouldn't be safe. Leo leaned forward. What do you know, Rebecca? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Samuel called me the night he disappeared. He was scared. He said he had proof. He said he was going to expose everything. The dumping, the bribes, the cover-up. He named names. What names? The owner of the cannery. The town council president. The sheriff. Leo's blood ran cold. The sheriff? Which sheriff? The one they had back then. Sheriff Dawson. He's dead now. Died in a car accident 5 years after Samuel disappeared. But he was in charge when my brother went missing. He was the one who said it was an accident. Leo wrote it down. Do you still have the proof? The names he gave you? I have a letter. He mailed it to me the same night he called. I didn't open it until after he was gone. I was too afraid. By the time I read it, it was too late to do anything. Can you send it to me? Rebecca hesitated. I don't know. If they find out I still have it. They already know someone is asking questions, Leo said. They broke into my room. They took my files. They made my witness disappear. If I'm going to stop them, I need that letter. Another long silence. Then Rebecca said, I'll send it. But you have to promise me something. What? You have to promise you won't let them bury this again. My brother deserves better than that. Leo looked out the window at the frozen town. I promise. 2 days later, the letter arrived at the motel. Leo opened it with careful hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten, dated the night Samuel disappeared. He read it slowly, absorbing every word. Samuel had indeed discovered the dumping. He had documented it for months. But more than that, he had discovered that the cannery was not just dumping waste. They were dumping barrels of chemicals that had been stolen from military surplus. Chemicals that were supposed to be destroyed. Chemicals that were valuable on the black market. The cannery was a front. The real business was illegal trafficking, and the people running it were some of the most powerful men in the county. Samuel named them. The cannery owner, a man named Victor Hale. The town council president, a man named Richard Flynn. The sheriff, Dawson. And one more name that made Leo stop. A man who was not in power back then, but who had been mentioned as a young lawyer representing the cannery. A man who had gone on to become something else. The current mayor of Frost Hollow. Leo stared at the name. Mayor Thomas Vance. The man who had welcomed him to town with a friendly handshake. The man who had offered his condolences to Margaret Cross on the news. The man who had smiled and said, "Let me know if there's anything I can do to help." Leo folded the letter carefully and put it in his inside pocket. Then he walked out of the motel and drove to the town hall. Mayor Thomas Vance was in his office, reviewing budget documents, when Leo walked in without knocking. The mayor looked up, surprised. "Mr. Brennan. This is unexpected." Leo closed the door behind him. "I need to talk to you." The mayor's eyes narrowed slightly, but he kept his smile. "Of course. Sit down." Leo did not sit. He stood by the door, his hand near his pocket. I have a letter. Written by Samuel Cross the night he disappeared. It names the people who were running an illegal trafficking operation through the cannery. It names you. The mayor's smile did not falter. That's quite an accusation. Samuel Cross was a troubled man. Everyone knows that. He wasn't troubled. He was murdered. And you were part of it. Mayor Vance leaned back in his chair. You have no proof. A letter written by a dead man? That's not evidence. That's hearsay. It's a start. And I have more. I have a witness who saw the dumping. I have photographs of the pipe. I have the names of everyone involved. The mayor's eyes hardened. Then why haven't you gone to the police? Because the police are part of it. The current sheriff might not have been there 15 years ago, but he's protecting the same people. He's cleaning up the same mess. Mayor Vance stood up slowly. You're making a mistake, Brennan. This town has been through enough. Digging up old graves helps no one. It helps Samuel Cross. It helps his wife. It helps the truth. The mayor walked to the window and looked out at the frozen lake. Do you know why Samuel died? Because he wouldn't listen. He kept pushing. He kept asking questions. He thought the truth would set him free. But the truth doesn't set anyone free. It just makes more trouble. Leo stepped forward. Is that a confession? The mayor turned around. His face was calm. It's a warning. Leave Frost Hollow. Go back to wherever you came from. Forget about Samuel Cross. Leo looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, I can't do that. And he walked out. That night, Leo drove to the state police barracks 2 hours away. He laid everything out for a detective named Sarah Chin. The letter. The photographs. The names. The witness who had disappeared. He told her about the break-in, the threats, the mayor's warning. Detective Chen listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, You understand that most of this is circumstantial. The letter is powerful, but it's not proof of murder. The witness is gone. The physical evidence from the cannery is 15 years old. Leo nodded. I know. But it's a start. Detective Chen looked at the names on the paper. Mayor Thomas Vance. That's a serious accusation. He all but confessed to me. He warned you to back off. That's not a confession. Leo leaned forward. There's a body in the morgue in Frost Hollow with a cut on its head. There's a woman who has waited 15 years for the truth. There's a town full of people who know what happened and are too afraid to say it. That's not nothing. Detective Chen studied him for a moment. Then she picked up her phone. I'll make some calls. We'll open a preliminary inquiry. But I'm warning you, Brennan. If this goes nowhere, you could be looking at obstruction charges. Defamation lawsuits. The mayor has resources. Leo sat back in his chair. I know. Outside, the snow was falling gently over the frozen landscape. Somewhere in Frost Hollow, Margaret Cross was sitting alone in her kitchen, waiting for news. Somewhere, Arthur Pines was hiding, afraid for his life. And somewhere, in the cold waters of Mirror Lake, the truth had finally risen to the surface. It had taken 15 years, but Samuel Cross was no longer silent. Leo looked at Detective Chen. "Where do we start?" She stood up and grabbed her coat. "We start by going back to Frost Hollow. We start by asking questions the town doesn't want to answer. And we start by finding Arthur Pines before someone else does." Leo followed her out into the night. Behind them, the lights of the barracks glowed warm against the darkness. Ahead, the frozen road stretched toward a town that had kept its secrets for too long. But secrets, like bodies in the ice, do not stay buried forever.